So to our first presentation, I'd like to welcome Professor Alex Shenfield and Dr. Al-Tamimi to the front. Together they bring around 50 years of research experience in AI, machine learning and large language models. Please join me in giving them a warm welcome.
Thank you. Now I feel really old. Thanks for that.
Okay, so Professor Alex and I am Dr. Karim. We are from Sheffield Hallam University. Typically we work with machine learning, data analytics, and a lot of focus right now on large language models, and we also work on computer vision as well. So what we'll be covering today is some basics of AI, some general questions that we usually get asked, AI trends that we see right now and how things are moving to the future, some of the AI projects that we're currently working on, and how we see things could be applied in finance, AI in finance. And Alex then will discuss some of the things that we need to basically consider, especially applying AI finance and what we call explainable AI. So I will first introduce myself. I'm Al-Tamimi. I worked in the US, Germany, UAE, now in UK. I work in a lot of fields related to AI. So again, I came from statistics, computer engineering background. Then the term machine learning, AI, became more common, and that's why we are machine learning and AI professors and doctors right now. And I will let Alex introduce himself.
So I'm a professor in machine learning at Sheffield Hallam University, but I'm an engineer by background and trade. So my focus is very much on solving problems with AI rather than developing models for the sake of developing models. So I'm actually based in the Department of Engineering and Maths, whereas Abdul Karim is based in the Department of Computing. I'm also, with my other hat on, the research theme lead for digital connectivity and technology within our National Centre for Excellence in Food Engineering at Sheffield Hallam. So I drive sort of the adoption of digital technologies, the industrial Internet of Things, etc., within food and drink manufacturing. An area that has historically lagged massively behind high-value manufacturing, such as automotive and aerospace, despite being the biggest manufacturing sector in the UK. And yeah, there's some of my achievements as well. I'm not going to go through them. Just to say that I'm a senior member of the IEEE and sit on several of the technical committees.
So the first thing we would like to discuss is the basics of AI. What do we mean by AI? And we tried as much as possible to clarify things. So the first thing we want to discuss is ChatGPT is not AI. It's not the only AI thing. It's one of the applications. And we need also to discuss that we're not really talking about general AI, something that could replace human thinking of all, basically the complexities that we do in our minds and everything. What we want to show you and demonstrate that we are focusing right now on what's called narrow AI, an AI that could be used just to replace a specific task in your company, to make things in your company, and this is basically what we want to focus on. So ChatGPT, again, is just one of the applications. Someone has trained basically the entire internet, tried to find basically a language model, so to reply to some of your queries. Now, before we say what is AI, we have to discuss what do we mean by intelligence before we go into artificial intelligence. So we can say that intelligence, basically, it's a lot of things that you can do. And if you ask someone, how can you define intelligence? We can say that someone who has some goals and purposes, they want to do things, it's not really random. They can interact with the environment. They can organize and prepare, so there's a planning process. They're aware of what's happening, so there's a kind of continuous gauging of what's happening and giving feedback. There is a memory. They can learn also from the previous experiences. So all of these things that we combine together, this is what we call intelligence. So then AI, or artificial intelligence, is trying to imitate this, try to capture some of these kind of tasks and things that we do, and try to teach the machine to do it for us. So that's why we call machine learning. We're trying to make the machine learn from our experiences, from the data that we give it. Of course, we can work with text, with audio, with video, with images, and eminently we have chatbots right now. So some of the common kind of fields of AI, and these are just few of them, by the way. So we have computer vision. We have natural language processing, trying to process all things related to text. We have reinforcement learning, and this is basically what you see in generative AI, where we produce images just by learning from other images and styles. And of course, we have forecasting and time series analysis. So this is more in line with finance. So what are the current AI trends that we see every day? You can see here,
this is a rough timeline of some of the most recent developments in AI. We can go back to the 1950s to talk about when neural networks sort of started to be proposed, but they didn't really take off until about 2012. In 2012, a guy called Alex Krizhevsky, whose name I am mangling, in Canada, built AlexNet. And they had this large-scale image recognition challenge called ImageNet. And in 2012, they beat the competition by somewhere around 10 to 15 percentage points on the error metric that they used. It was a massive step change in computer vision. So much so that the next year, 2013, every single competitor in that challenge used the same approach as AlexNet. I mean, different models, but using convolutional neural networks, which was the basic approach. It's important to note that convolutional neural networks were not actually a new thing at the time, but massive explosions in sort of the ability to do computation have led to sort of the practical realization of these deep neural networks. Then a few other highlights on the line is the sort of 2018 development of sort of large language models such as GPT and BERT. I don't know whether you remember at the time, I'm massively geeky anyway, so I was following everything despite, just trying to work it out. OpenAI refused to release their models for GPT. They said it was too dangerous. Their exact quote, in fact, for GPT-2 was, "Due to our concerns about malicious applications of technology, we are not releasing the trained model. As an experiment in responsible disclosure, we are instead releasing a much smaller model that researchers can look at." The genie was well and truly out of the bottle there, though. So they refused to release their model. Several other companies went, well, we can do the same thing, we can use the same approach, and they trained and released full-scale models that were just as good as GPT-2. We've also got improved generative models in GPT-3. We've got image generation generative models in DALL-E and Stable Diffusion, and obviously ChatGPT, which introduced the semi-supervised learning approach to make sure that the models gave much more human palatable answers. So one of the problems with GPT-1 and 2 was they were trained on the whole of the internet, and the whole of the internet has some really weird shit. So they had somewhat of a tendency to go off on one. And a bit like the weird guy in the pub, they'd start spouting a whole load of stuff that you didn't want to use in your companies, we'll say. They had a tendency to go into conspiracy theories, racism, etc. So ChatGPT was a big advance there because they used this sort of concept of human-based reinforcement learning to curb that. Basically, they gave a load of the sort of generative answers that the model produced. They then showed to humans and said, is this acceptable? And then they had a reward model that was trained off the human responses to basically curb the worst excesses of the generative language model. So I think the main AI advance in this timeline from sort of around here is the idea of pre-training models. And this is a big part of what's used in sort of generative AI and large language models, is this concept of pre-training. So you take a model, like a model architecture, and you train it on some sort of data that's vaguely related to the data that you're working with. In language models, it's sort of next word prediction in sentences, for example. And then you've got a base, what they're starting to call foundation models. And you can have foundation models in vision, you can have foundation models in language processing and stuff. And that is a model that is very good at just recognizing general trends within computer vision or within language modeling. And then you can fine-tune it. So you can take these pre-trained models, you can add your data, you can do something called transfer learning or fine-tuning, and you get a model that is leveraging all of this data from the pre-trained models, all of the entirety of the internet, for example, or the sort of 6-7 million images in the ImageNet challenge, but is customized to sort of specifically work with your data. So you've got all of this background knowledge, but you've also got sort of some foreground knowledge that you've provided some domain-specific stuff. And that gives you much better results than just the pre-trained model on its own. And then you can deploy it and you can solve your own tasks. So there's a few commercial products to do this sort of thing. So there's Azure Vision AI and Form Recognizer. In actual fact, most of the cloud computing services, Azure, Google, Amazon, they all have sort of AI-based stuff that you can leverage. So they've all jumped onto this bandwagon. There's several options in Azure, including this vision stuff, which is a service that sort of enables you to leverage these pre-trained models sort of with low-code or no-code approaches to sort of customizing them on your own data. And so this form recognizer can scan a receipt, sort of digitize it, and come up with sort of some summary of what the receipt contains. Google Vision have very much the same thing, and there's a Google Vision API, and you can scan a picture, you can detect multiple objects, you can detect labels, detect explicit content, etc. You can throw some of your own data at it to fine-tune it to get better on a task that you want. And in a few slides' time, we'll talk about some of the applications that use similar approaches. And the final commercial thing that we're going to talk about is IBM Watson, which is much more focused on sort of large language models for summarizing textual documents. You can throw PDFs at it, and it can give you a summary of some of the stuff that it knows about those PDFs. So now both me and Abdul Karim are going to talk about some of the projects that we've worked on so that you can get a flavor of how we're actually using AI in the real world.
Thank you. So just quickly, all these projects actually were done in Sheffield Hallam University as a proof of concept to companies. So these actually were implemented by our undergraduate students, and this is just a taste of what can be done. Yeah, so one of the, for instance, I would just show you how AI actually could impact the finance of any industry. So for instance, this is an appointment or virtual assistant tool that has been developed for the NHS. And you can see that in just few months of deployment, they achieved 1,000 conversations per month. They are potentially saving up to £500,000. They also saved 600 working hours per week. 86% basically of patients or people who use the service, they liked it. They say it's okay. And the adoption rate is around 15%, just in a few months. Of course, we're doing something like this in Sheffield Hallam University. We know the impact of ailment detection, how AI can help. There is a recent study that says basically just using the current technology, that well-tested technology, we can save up to 122 hours per hospital per day, and this amounts to 100 million per hospital per year. So just think how many hospitals we have and how much we can save. Some of the projects, for instance, I'm working on is detection of cognitive frailty. So this is kind of self-assessment tool that can help people keep track of if there's any cognitive impairment. It's non-invasive, and we're just using what's called text readability. So we ask the patient just to read a text, answer a few questions, and we will have this kind of assessment ready for us. Another one that we just won is Longitude Prize in Dementia. It's a wearable device that basically modular. People living with dementia can add modular functions to it. It's very interactive. Also, we're trying to have more like an immersive experience for people wearing the devices. Another project is what we call Siri. So we have all these kind of assistive technologies and robots available for residents, but they don't speak to each other. So we try to make them speak to each other. At the same time, we try to connect the resident homes with smart city infrastructure. So this is also, the link is not there. We try as much as possible to link it. And at the same time, we try to detect any anomalies in their patterns and their daily activities to help serve them as well. Another project sponsored by Innovate UK, working with one of the SMEs in Sheffield area. We're trying to take concrete samples and see how, if we infuse it with steel fiber, how we can eventually apply it to different application of concrete, and this is all automated using AI. So we take a sample, we can tell you that this sample could be used in this application or the other application. And I think we actually achieved around 96% of accuracy, which is really good just for the feasibility study.
So
Alex?
This is one of the projects that I've been working on, and that's applying AI in the creative industries. So we're working with a company up in Leeds, and this is Innovate UK funded through the KTP scheme, which some of you might know of. So they curate historical archives. Their business model is that they'll go to either the British Archives or some other people that hold big collections of documents. They'll digitize them, they'll curate them, and then they'll sell access to those collections to universities and other interested parties. They've got a great OCR process, so they can turn the text, like the scanned documents, into text that's searchable and stuff. But what they couldn't ever do was anything with images. They had no idea about sort of image content within the archives. So it's called British Online Archives, and they've got collections that come from these are all from sort of fairly recently, but they've got collections that span back to the 1700s. They've handwritten documents. So what we did was to try and accelerate the archive publication workflow by using human-in-the-loop machine learning. We wanted to be able to develop machine learning tools that would enhance the user experience as well as sort of the editor's experience by identifying important visual information and creating searchable metadata for images. So if somebody wanted to look for planes, for example, they could put that in the search box, and not only would it bring up mentions of planes within the documents, it would bring up photos that had planes in as well. And this is just some of the archives that we've been working with. This is mostly sort of World War II secrecy and sabotage, so it's a history of basically actions behind enemy lines. And we also look at creating intelligent search functionality to learn user search intents as well. So this project is blending both computer vision skills and natural language processing skills as well. This was the last time I wore a suit, by the way. As you can tell, we're letting the side down. So as I said right at the start when I introduced myself, I'm the Digital Connectivity Research Theme Lead for our National Centre for Excellence in Food Engineering. It opened its doors in September 2019. This is taken from the opening ceremony. We've been awarded $14.5 million across about 20 projects since 2018. As I said, it opened its doors in 2019 as a standalone building out in Attercliffe, and you can see it there. Then it immediately closed again because of COVID. So we were open less than 6 months before the university basically shut everything down for, I don't know, nearly 2 years before it reopened again properly. So part of my role is sort of adoption of Industry 4 tech, but a big part of the adoption of Industry 4 tech in all sorts of industries is being able to analyse that data. So one of the projects that we're currently working on is looking at inline quality control for baking using computer vision techniques. And we're looking at crackers as they come out of the ovens, whether they've been overbaked and underbaked, whether they're perfect, that sort of thing, and trying to optimize basically the oven temperature profiles to make sure that we're wasting an awful lot less food. At the moment, they have a guy sat on the output of the oven, and he's looking at the conveyor belt and he's chucking all the ones that are burnt in the bin. We'd like him to be out of work. I mean, no, we wouldn't want him to be out of work. We'd like him to have to do less. So we're going to use computer vision techniques to look at crackers that are overbaked, and then we can turn the ovens down, or we can recalibrate the burners in the oven to be able to optimize those baking profiles. Another thing that we're doing in the agri-food space is looking at rice cultivar classification. So we've got sort of a long ongoing relationship with a guy that makes rice mills, a company that make rice mills that are much more sophisticated than the majority of rice mills that are deployed in China, India, etc. And we're looking at incorporating AI tech, particularly computer vision tech, in the rice mills to identify broken grains of rice, but also be able to detect food fraud. So Alec Anderson, who's the guy at Cool Mill that we're working with, is very fond of quoting the statistic, there's more basmati sold in the world than there is grown, right? So there is an awful lot of basmati, and you go out shopping, you'll get your bag of basmati off the shelf in the supermarket. There's a fairly good chance that a good proportion of that is a low-value cultivar that's been mixed in with basmati to bulk it out. So there's a whole load of high-value rice, and there is a financial incentive for mills to adulterate the output of their rice with something cheaper. So we're using computer vision techniques to identify what these grains of rice are, and be able to detect when people have been mixing in a lower quality grain of rice. There you go.
Thank you, Alex. So we'll be discussing some of the projects basically, and some of the application of AI in finance. So we would like also to emphasize that typically when we work with data, we have certain kind of stages that we go through. So when we work with any company, typically the first thing is we try to collect the data. And this is basically means collecting any data that we can get our hands on. So it could be interviews with the clients, their staff, any stored data, etc. Then we do cleaning of the data just to remove outliers, anything that is not really interested. Some also to reserve the privacy of the data, etc. And then we try to identify any patterns in the data to get some insight. And we then apply machine learning techniques to get what we call foresight. So we can predict, we can classify, we can add more data, we can know exactly what's happening basically under all these piles of data and papers that we have. One of the things that we worked on before is how we can optimize supply chain management, how we can collect the data, have access to historical data that you have, and then we can have a what-if tool. Then we can try different things, different options, different strategies, and see how this is eventually could impact delivery, and would try to reduce the risk associated with it. One of the common also applications of AI is try to see what is the sentiment analysis, and this is what we know, what we call know your product, how people are reacting to your product, how they are basically giving you feedback through Twitter, Facebook, etc. And we have also another technique, which is topic modeling. See what are the major products people are paying attention to, they like, and eventually we can improve services and products. One of the common techniques as well is what we call personal knowledge graph. We can connect a person to different services. We can know exactly what these people are interested in. So if 70% of people, they're interested in health in a certain way, finance in a certain way, then probably they're interested in education in a certain way. So we can segment our users. We know exactly what they like, they don't like, how to target them. So there's a lot of targeted marketing campaigns just based on this. And this is just a drop in the sea of the possibility that you can do with this. Another thing that I personally interested in is what we call readability, especially for low resource languages. So most of the work we work on typically is done in English language. But if you go to other languages, especially if you want to target their markets, you have to have your own tools specifically for their languages. So, of course, we work with the finance departments as well to see how we can improve the readability of the text given to the clients, especially because sometimes people, they make these documents kind of complex, so they can hide details, they can fool people, they could be malicious in intent. And this is actually, we had the workshop just a couple of months ago, and just to see what are the readability tools available to us in different languages. One of the things that I personally interested in, this is kind of a snippet of something I did in my PhD 23 years ago. So it was actually not machine learning back then, it was just statistics. So we used something, actually a model that was used to predict the price of, price back then. And we used it to predict the traffic of videos. So video traffic, how much it will consume, we use it to predict it now. But we can see people can use it to recommend top stocks, basically seeing the patterns in the trend, the seasonality, all these things, the data, and at the same time try to see the influence of people tweeting about things, people, news articles, all these things, and gather all these kind of information, qualitative data, and connect it with quantitative data that we have eventually to come up with, yes, this stock probably will rise, will drop, etc. And Alex now will speak about the landscape of AI.
Yeah. That's all right, I've only got a couple of slides, it's fine. So we've talked a lot about the applications and sort of potential applications and stuff. At the moment, it's a bit of a Wild West, right? There is very little regulation. There's a lot of talk about it, but there are obviously regulations incoming. So this is currently what the regulatory landscape looks like. So in the UK, the primary legislation governing what we can do with machine learning and predominantly what we can do with data is the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. I don't propose to talk about that because it's highly complex and I'm sure you all know much more about it than me. But globally, Canada have an Artificial Intelligence and Data Act that they imposed in 2022. China have some in-progress algorithm provisions and stuff around generative AI and deep synthesis provisions. The USA, being the USA and free market, have a lot of non-binding recommendations from NIST and the Office of Science and Technologies. But yeah, they're all non-binding, so companies are free to ignore them as much as they want. But probably the biggest piece of legislation is the incoming EU AI Act, which is going to establish 4 levels of risk for AI. We've got unacceptable risk, high risk, limited risk, and minimal risk. And different rules apply depending on the level of risk that a system provides to sort of fundamental user rights. Some applications are seen as unacceptable risk, and you can't do them, basically. And that includes applications such as cognitive behavioral manipulation of people, So the stuff that Cambridge Analytica did using data from Facebook to influence people's voting behaviours and stuff, well, that's going to be banned under the EU AI Act, assuming that they can actually detect it. Social scoring, so stuff like the credit scoring and the social credit scoring that China are using will be illegal under the EU AI Act. And real-time and remote biometric identification systems, such as facial recognition, will also be banned as unacceptable risk, with some limited exceptions. Probably the main thing of interest is the high-risk section. So the other risk categories, you have minimal controls. But under high risk, we're talking about stuff like employment, worker management, access to self-employment, access to and enjoyment of essential public services and private services, and that includes stuff like credit scoring. So stuff like the sort of credit ratings and risk ratings and stuff that are used in sort of assessing credit risk of customers, but I guess also of companies, are regulated, the use of AI in that field, or will be regulated. As well as stuff about legal interpretation and the application of law. So using large language models in, I think there were some cases in the States where people were using sort of AI lawyers, or developing AI lawyers that would advise on sort of specific court cases. Well, they're going to be highly regulated under the EU AI Act. The impact of AI Act on financial institutions will vary based around specific AI applications, but particularly sort of in financial services where you've got where you're making decisions about the risk of sort of people's credit defaults, etc. It counts as high risk, and you'll need to be able to show that you've got adequate risk assessment and mitigation systems, that the data sets that you've trained your AI models on are high quality, are curated, and are not just a load of random data. So you're going to have to be able to show an audit trail through those. Detailed documentation, providing basically all of the fit-for-purpose auditing information so that authorities can assess its compliance. Be able to inform your users of exactly how the system is working and how their data is going to be used. Appropriate human oversight measures to minimize risk, so you can't just use an AI model and reject based around that decision. You're going to have human oversight in there to say, actually, the AI model, it's made an accurate assessment of risk and we agree, so you can't have any money. And you need to be able to demonstrate that you've got high levels of robustness, security, and accuracy. So one of the big issues with a lot of the sort of work that they've done in AI models for this kind of thing in the past has been sort of the inherent biases that are baked in the data. And I think that's something that the EU are very, very conscious of and very, very keen to show at least that there's been some attempt to mitigate those biases. So one of the technical things that we can do, and this is my last slide, so you're all right, is to get around or to sort of implement some of those sort of checks and balances that the EU AI Act is going to impose, is using explainable AI models. And that basically just means that when the AI model makes a prediction, you know how it got there. So you can have some confidence in the prediction that the AI model made. And there's a whole load of sort of techniques to do that, and it is a very active area of research at the moment. I don't propose to go into those in detail, but just to highlight that this is a potential route forward for high-risk AI applications as defined by the EU AI Act. Okay, that comes to the end of our presentation. So
Thank you.
I'm going to hand over.